species lists or health department warnings? So put on your bell-bottoms and fire up the avocado-colored stove as we take a fascinating journey through what we ate in the 1970s. Redfish blackened in cast iron. In the 1970s, Louisiana chef Paul Prudhomme introduced his famous blackened redfish recipe, creating a nationwide sensation. Restaurants across America raced to add this spicy, charred fish dish to their menus, and home cooks eagerly attempted to recreate the magic in their own kitchens. The popularity of blackened redfish had devastating consequences. By the mid-1980s, redfish red drum populations in the Gulf of Mexico had plummeted to dangerous. Commercial harvesting of redfish was banned in federal waters, and many states implemented strict regulations. Today, while recreational fishing of redfish is allowed in some areas with strict catch limits, the commercial sale of wild-caught Gulf redfish remains largely illegal. That delicious blackened redfish that was the star of so many 1970s dinner parties would now come with hefty fines if caught and sold commercially. Tiger meat sandwiches. No, this wasn't made from actual tigers. Tiger meat was a Midwestern specialty particularly popular in the 1970s. A sandwich spread made from raw ground beef, seasoned with onions, salt, pepper, and sometimes raw eggs. This raw meat concoction was typically served on rye bread or crackers at parties and family gatherings. Today, serving raw ground beef would violate food safety regulations in most places. The USDA and FDA strongly advise against consuming raw meat due to the risk of E. coli, salmonella, and other dangerous pathogens. Health departments would quickly shut down any establishment serving tiger meat sandwiches, and you could face serious legal consequences for serving them at a public event. What was once a beloved party appetizer is now considered a major food safety violation. In the 19th century, passenger pigeon was a common food, often baked into pies. By the 1970s, this once abundant bird was long gone, a cautionary tale about unsustainable food practices. This extinction helped build momentum for the conservation movements that would eventually lead to the protections many species now enjoy. Today, harvesting any migratory bird without proper permits violates the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, with penalties including fines and imprisonment. The casual hunting of wild birds that was once common in American history is now strictly regulated. Sea turtle soup. In the 1970s, sea turtle soup was still found on high-end restaurant menus and in specialty markets, particularly in coastal areas with strong maritime traditions. This luxurious soup, often made with green sea turtle meat, was considered a delicacy and status symbol dating back centuries. By 1973, the Endangered Species Act was passed, but enforcement took time to ramp up. Throughout the decade, turtle populations continued to decline dramatically. Today, all species of sea turtles are protected under the Endangered Species Act and international agreements. Hunting, killing, harassing, or consuming sea turtles or their eggs is strictly prohibited, with violations resulting in heavy fines and potential imprisonment. What was once a symbol of culinary sophistication would now be considered wildlife crime. Whale meat steaks. Though not common in most American households, whale meat was still legally available in some markets in the early 1970s, particularly in areas with whaling traditions or significant immigrant populations from whaling nations. This red beef-like meat was typically prepared as steaks or roasts. The Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972 changed everything, prohibiting the hunting, killing, capture, or harassment of marine mammals in U.S. waters. This was followed by the Worldwide Commercial Whaling Moratorium implemented by the International Whaling Commission in 1986. Today, possessing or consuming whale meat in the United States is illegal except for limited subsistence hunting by Alaska natives. What was once an exotic but legal dinner option is now a serious wildlife crime carrying heavy penalties. Eagle Eggs Benedict. This entry is somewhat hypothetical, as bald eagle eggs were already protected in the 1970s. However, the Endangered Species Act of 1973 significantly strengthened protections for eagles and many other species. Before strong federal wildlife protections, there were historical cases of eagle eggs being collected and consumed, particularly in some Native American traditions. Today, disturbing eagle nests or possessing eagle parts, including eggs, without special permits, primarily limited to members of federally recognized tribes for religious purposes, is a serious federal crime under both the Endangered Species Act and the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. Violations can result in prison time and substantial fines. This illustrates how wildlife protection laws have become much more comprehensive and strictly enforced since the 1970s. Home-butchered venison. In rural America of the 1970s, hunting season meant filling the freezer. Many families supplemented their diets with venison, and the regulations around hunting, butchering, and sharing game meat were much more relaxed. Hunters would often process their own deer at home and share the bounty with neighbors and extended family without much paperwork or oversight. Today, while hunting remains popular, the regulations have tightened significantly. Most states require specific permits not just for hunting, but also for processing game. There are strict rules about how venison can be shared, with many states prohibiting the giving of wild game meat to anyone outside the hunter's immediate family without proper documentation. Commercial sale of wild harvested venison is illegal nationwide. The casual neighborhood deer processing and now potentially violate multiple wildlife and food safety laws. Unpasteurized dairy products. In the 1970s, many rural families still consumed raw, unpasteurized milk, cheese, and other dairy products, either from their own cows or from local farmers. Raw milk was widely available and considered perfectly normal in many states, and interstate sale is prohibited by federal law. The FDA has determined that raw milk can harbor dangerous bacteria like Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli. While some states do permit limited sales of raw milk, the regulations are strict, and violations was commonplace in the 1970s would now potentially violate numerous food safety regulations. Home-canned foods without modern safety protocols. The 1970s saw a resurgence of home canning as part of the Back to the Land movement, but the safety standards were far less developed. Many families followed outdated methods passed down through generations rather than scientifically tested protocols. Poured into jars without additional processing was still common for many foods. Today, selling home-canned foods without following approved USDA guidelines and without proper licensing, inspection, and testing would violate food safety laws in most jurisdictions. Commercial sale of home-canned low-acid foods like vegetables, meats, and soups is particularly restricted due to the risk of botulism. The casual home canning operations that supplied many 1970s pantries would now potentially violate numerous health codes if those products were sold to the public. Horse meat steaks. In the 1970s, horse meat was still legally available in some parts of the United States. While never as popular as beef, it was considered an acceptable, if somewhat unusual, meat choice. Some specialty butchers carried horse meat, and it was particularly popular among certain immigrant communities with traditions of eating horse meat. The landscape changed dramatically in 2007 when Congress effectively banned horse slaughter for human consumption by defunding federal inspection of horse slaughter plants. Though this ban has lapsed and been reinstated several times, social pressure and state laws have kept horse meat off American tables. Currently, there are no operating horse slaughter facilities in the U.S., and selling horse meat for human consumption would violate laws in many states. What was once an alternative red meat option in the 1970s would now be extremely difficult or impossible to legally. Homemade moonshine. During the 1970s, particularly in rural areas with strong traditions of home distilling, moonshine, illegally produced high-proof spirits, remained fairly common. While technically illegal even then, enforcement was spotty, and many people still produce spirits at home for personal consumption or limited local distribution. Today, federal and state laws against unlicensed alcohol production are enforced much more stringently. Producing spirits without proper licensing and tax payments is a federal offense that can result in felony charges, with penalties including up to 5 years in prison and hefty fines. While laws allowing for home beer and wine production have loosened, the prohibition against home distilling remains strict. That mason jar of Grandpa's special recipe from the 1970s could now lead to serious legal consequences. Absinthe cocktails. In the 1970s, true absinthe remained banned in the United States, as it had been since 1912. But underground consumption of imported bottles still occurred, particularly in artistic and countercultural circles. The mystique of this anise-flavored spirit, with its supposed hallucinogenic properties, made it an alluring forbidden fruit. The irony is that today, absinthe is legal again in the United States since 2007. Provided it complies with FDA regulations regarding thujonic content. So this is actually a reversal. What was illegal in the 1970s is now legal. However, the homemade absinthe preparations that sometimes circulated in the 1970s, often containing dangerous levels of toxic compounds, would still be illegal today under food safety laws. This case demonstrates how regulations sometimes become more sensible over time, focusing on specific harmful components rather than banning products entirely. Imported haggis. Traditional Scottish haggis, a savory pudding containing sheep's heart, liver, and lungs, minced with onion, oatmeal, sweet, and spices, all encased in the animal's stomach, was still legally imported into the United States in the 1970s. Scottish-American families could enjoy authentic haggis for Burns Night celebrations and other special occasions. In 1971, the USDA banned the use of livestock lungs in food products, and in 1989, imported haggis containing sheep lungs was prohibited due to concerns about scrapie, a sheep disease. Today, authentic Scottish haggis cannot legally be imported into the United States. While American-made versions, without lungs, are available, traditionalists insist it's not the same. The authentic imported haggis that graced Scottish-American tables in the 1970s would now be seized by customs officials. Unpasteurized milk cheese aged less than 60 days. In the 1970s, regulations regarding cheese production, particularly around raw milk cheese, were less stringent. Imported and domestic cheeses made from unpasteurized milk with short aging times were widely available, bringing their distinctive flavors to American tables. Today, FDA regulations prohibit the sale of raw milk cheeses aged less than 60 days. This effectively bans many traditional European soft cheeses in their authentic form. Versions sold in the U.S. must either use pasteurized milk or be aged longer than traditional methods specify, altering their characteristic textures and flavors. The authentic raw milk brie, camembert, and similar cheeses that food enthusiasts enjoyed in the 1970s would now violate food safety regulations if sold in their traditional forms. Homemade cough syrup with codeine. In some households during the 1970s, particularly in rural areas or in families with European traditions, homemade cough remedies containing small amounts of codeine or other controlled substances were still occasionally prepared. While prescription requirements for codeine existed, enforcement was less stringent, and some families maintained traditional medicinal recipes passed down through generations. Today, producing any medication containing controlled substances without proper pharmaceutical licensing would violate numerous federal and state laws with serious criminal penalties. The DEA and FDA strictly regulate even small amounts of codeine and similar substances. The homemade medicinal preparations that some grandmothers stirred up in the 1970s could now result in drug manufacturing charges. Authentic sassafras root tea. Sassafras tea, made from the root tree, was a traditional folk remedy and beverage in many parts of America. Throughout the 1970s, people still harvested sassafras roots to make this aromatic tea, particularly in the South and Appalachian regions. The FDA banned sassafras root for food use in 1976 after studies showed that safrole, a major component of sassafras oil, caused cancer in laboratory animals. Today, selling traditional sassafras root tea or food products containing actual sassafras root oil would violate FDA regulations. Modern sassafras flavorings have the safrole removed. The natural sassafras root tea that was a common home remedy in the early 1970s is now effectively prohibited for commercial sale. Roadkill stew. In rural America during the 1970s, it wasn't uncommon for people to salvage meat from animals killed by vehicles on roadways. This waste not, want not approach was particularly common during economic hard times, and roadkill deer, rabbit, and other animals sometimes ended up in family stews and roasts. Today, salvaging roadkill is strictly regulated in most states. While some states have enacted roadkill salvage laws permitting the practice under specific conditions, usually requiring permits and reporting, many still prohibit it entirely. In states without explicit permissions, taking roadkill without proper authorization could violate wildlife laws. The casual roadside harvesting that some rural families practiced in the 1970s would now be illegal in many jurisdictions without proper permit. Unregulated wild mushroom risotto. In the 1970s, as interest in foraging and natural foods grew, many amateur mushroom hunters gathered wild fungi to incorporate into family meals. Regulation of wild mushroom sales was minimal, and home-gathered mushrooms might be shared at community events or even sold informally to local restaurants. Today, selling wild foraged mushrooms is highly regulated in most states. Commercial sale typically requires proper identification by certified experts, and health departments have strict rules about the source. Without proper knowledge, the casual selling or public serving of wild mushrooms that occurred in the 1970s would now violate food safety regulations in many jurisdictions. Raw oyster platters. In the 1970s, oyster lovers consumed these briny delicacies year-round, without much concern for seasonal safety. The old adage about only eating oysters in months with an R, September through April, was often ignored as refrigeration and transportation improved. Today, strict regulations govern raw oyster sales, particularly those harvested from Gulf Coast waters during warm months, roughly May through October, due to the risk of Vibrio vulnificus bacteria, which thrives in warmer waters. Some states prohibit the sale of raw Gulf oysters during summer months, unless they've undergone special processing to eliminate bacteria. The casual summer oyster bars of the 1970s would now face significant regulatory hurdles and potential legal consequences for selling untreated raw oysters during prohibited months. Homemade beef jerky for sale. In the 1970s, homemade beef jerky was often sold at local markets, roadside stands, and even some small grocery stores. Many families had special recipes passed down through generations, and making jerky was a way to preserve meat and earn extra income. Today, selling homemade jerky without proper facilities, inspections, and licenses would violate food safety regulations in most jurisdictions. Meat products face particularly strict oversight due to the risk of foodborne illness. Commercial jerky production requires inspected facilities, HACCP plans, and regular testing. The neighborhood jerky maker of the 1970s would now need significant investment in licensed facilities and regulatory compliance to legally sell if sold or distributed without proper licensing. Homemade infant formula. In the 1970s, some mothers still prepared homemade baby formulas using evaporated milk, corn syrup, and vitamin supplements, following recipes often provided by pediatricians or passed down through families. Commercial formula existed, but was sometimes avoided due to cost or personal preference. Today, making and selling homemade infant formula would violate FDA regulations.